Hello, everyone. My name's Ethan Hacker, and today I'm here to talk to you about logic and to dig into the philosophy of logic, its importance, and then how to cultivate logical thinking. So, first, definitions and terms. And then we're going to talk about how to think logically, the benefits of thinking logically, and then fallibility in logic. So, what is logic? Well, most definitions of logic that I found could be aggregated into the single definition of structured reasoning. And when I consulted Dr. Shockley's book, Thinking with Excellence, it said that logic is investigating correct reasoning. So there we have correctness and reasoning. Kurt Gödel, a very famous logician from the mid 20th century, defined logic to be a well formed first order principal formula without identity. So, much more technical, strict definition there, but still it has that structure to it. And then Merriam Webster defined logic to be the science of formal principles of reasoning. So, all of these definitions then beg the question of what is reasoning? Well, in my last video project, I assumed man is rational as one of my axioms. Reason and rationality are hard to define. Most definitions I found could be summarized as thinking in a way to get to the truth. And I would have to agree with this. I think that's a solid definition. And truth being defined earlier as that which is in accordance with God. Okay, so now let's talk about axioms. An axiom is something that is assumed to be true without proof. Now, some people might turn up their nose and say, well, how can we assume something is true without knowing it's true? But if you do not assume something is true, you have no foundation to stand on. You would just spend all of your time asking, is that true? Is that true? Is that true? And you would never be able to get to an answer. So, the same way that a house has a concrete foundation, logic has a logical foundation that all logical structures are built on. And that foundation is axioms. Thinking with Excellence proposes five logical axioms. First, the law of identity: A is A, or something is itself. The law of existence: A is, meaning that there is something that we can talk about. The law of non contradiction: this means that A is not equal to not A, or something is not its opposite, if you want to think of it like that, and a little more fast and loose terms there. The law of the excluded middle: A or not A. This means that a logical statement is either true or false. There's not some middle value in between true and false. And this is actually a little bit of a controversial logical axiom. Not everybody agrees to this, and some statements are true if assuming the law of the excluded middle, and false if not assuming the law of the excluded middle. There is a bit of controversy over the law of the excluded middle, and we'll get into that a little bit later on as we go. Um, and finally, there's the law of rational inference. If A implies B and B implies C, then A implies C. So these are all things that most people would agree on just in a heartbeat. Of course, something is itself. Of course, stuff exists. Of course, something is not its opposite. But different logical systems have different axioms. I took a year ago a linear algebra class, and in that class, we assumed eight different axioms in order to prove things using linear algebra. So, depending on what you're trying to argue or what you're trying to prove, you may have different axioms. Definitions and arguments. So, whereas an axiom is a self evident truth, a definition is created to describe something. Merriam-Webster defines a definition as a statement expressing the essential nature of something, and I really, really liked this definition. That essential nature is really what caught my eye. It's what we actually care about. And definitions are so important because if we're both talking about a dog, but my definition of a dog is an orangutan, and your definition of a dog is a house cat, then we would be using the same semantical words, but we would not be talking about the same thing. I'm talking about an orangutan, you're talking about a house cat, but we're using the same words. So, same word, different definition. An argument is this is not as we would normally see an argument of two people having a heated back and forth discussion. Rather, an argument arranges axioms and definitions in a logical way in order to convince someone of a point. Merriam-Webster defines an argument as a coherent series of reasons, statements, or facts intended to support or establish a point of view. Okay, now that we've got all of our terms established, let's talk about some steps to thinking logically. And these are four steps that I put together. I'm a senior math major. So I've been studying logic for a little bit now. I am by no means an expert in logic, and my math homework is riddled with logical errors. But these are the four steps that I found to be most helpful when trying to think logically. The first is to establish your axioms. The second is to understand definitions. The third is to formulate an argument. And the fourth is to look for counterexamples. Okay, so establish axioms. Everybody has their own axioms. And by the way, in this section of thinking logically, I'm going to be talking about convincing yourself of something, convincing someone else of something. Logic can help in both of those cases. So everybody has their own axioms, whether or not they know it. And it's really important to understand those axioms because if you're trying to convince yourself of something, you want to dig into your own axiom and say, what do I know to be true? Is what I know to be true agree with this statement? If you're trying to convince someone of something, you need to dig into their axioms and say, what do they assume to be true? What do they hold near and dear as the truth? And if you're able to dig into someone's axioms, you can construct a much more convincing argument in order to argue to them. For example, I assume that man is rational and God exists as my two axioms. If you tried to argue to me in an argument about anything that did not follow from those two axioms, it would be a really tough time convincing me because those are two things that I know to be true. Okay, understanding definitions. So, in order to discuss anything, you have to be on the same page about what you're talking about. Back to the orangutan cat example. If we both say dog, we can mean different things. So, before you try to understand what someone is trying to argue, first understand their definitions. For example, maybe a politician would say, we need free college and free healthcare because it will improve our society in these ways. Before worrying about how they claim it will improve our society, first we need to ask ourselves, what does free mean in this case? What does healthcare mean in this case? And what does college mean in this case? Does free mean it's going to tax me a lot more? Taxes are going to stay the same. Does college mean community college, four-year university, Ivy League university? Who is everyone in this example? Questions like that. Really dig into what the words they're saying mean before you dig into their argument. Next, we need to formulate an argument. After axioms have been established and definitions stated, you can then make an argument either to someone or to yourself. And when somebody is arguing to you, you want to listen to their argument, but you also want to be able to dissect it and go back into their axioms and their definitions and say, is what they're saying, is the statement that this person is making flow logically from their definitions and their axioms? If what the claim they're making does not flow logically from definitions and axioms, you might want to throw up some caution blinders. Things could be getting hairy. And finally, when digging into someone's argument, do it in good faith. Don't avoid fallacious arguments, arguments not rooted in logic. You don't want to give someone a counter argument that is just a straw man or a red herring or one of these other fallacies. You want to have a logical discussion in order to get to the truth, not to win, but to get to the truth. Finally, after an argument's been made, we want to look for counterexamples. See if the argument that someone's made flows logically from definitions and axioms, and does it hold up to what we see in the real world? And again, look for counterexamples in good faith. Don't try to twist what someone has said to fit your counterexample. Always return to their axioms and their definitions. If someone is convincing you of something or you convincing yourself of something and it flows from axioms, definitions are solid, the argument is sound, and There are no glaring counterexamples. You can probably take what they're saying to be true. There are a lot of benefits to thinking logically. Logic allows you to more accurately express yourself, define your terms more precisely. You have an increased ability for self criticism, which helps you lead to self growth and improving upon yourself. And you're able to more effectively communicate with one another. I mean, this video that I'm recording right now, it's all just ones and zeros, trues and false, with logical operators in between them. Our entire world is run off of logic. It's a phenomenal tool. But we should still keep in mind that logic is man made. It's extremely successful. First order logic is responsible for the world we live in, but it is still man made. Man is fallible, thus, logic is fallible. And here are some flaws in logic. Usually, these flaws in logic deal to self referential statements or statements which are talking about themselves. Consider the statement, this statement is false. If the statement is true, it must be false. And if it's false, it must be true. If it's true, it must be false. And you just get in this paradoxical loop. What really concerned mathematicians in the mid 20th centuries with Gödel was the set B, which is the set of sets that do not contain themselves. Because if B contains itself, it must not contain itself. But if it does not contain itself, it must contain itself. And it's the same as this statement is false. Kurt Gödel, that logician I mentioned a while ago, proved that math is undecidable, meaning there are true statements in math that it cannot prove. Any system of math that has basic arithmetic has statements that cannot be proved true. And he showed that math could be inconsistent, meaning there could be a paradox or a contradiction that arises in mathematics. So even though logic is this awesome system, it's not perfect. We know it's undecidable and it's very possibly inconsistent. So that's all to say that while logic is awesome at analyzing things inside human reasoning, it cannot analyze things outside of human reasoning. For example, there are parts of God, the soul, and emotion that exist outside of human reasoning. And if we were to try applying logic to it, it'd be like trying to screw in a bolt with a hammer. It just wouldn't work. It's not what the tool is designed to do. Logic is fantastic. I think everybody should take at least one course in logic. I think it's very fun and teaches you how to think. However, it is not the final source or answer by any stretch of the imagination. Here's my references, and thank you for watching.